Looks like everyone's connecting, so excellent. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Bill Perry. I'm the Director of Development and Marketing here at CultureWorks. So normally I'm the one who raises the money. That way we can give it away for fantastic programs like this. So, but busy day, and we're very happy to be very busy over here at CultureWorks. So on behalf of CultureWorks, I'd like to take a moment to thank Montgomery County Arts and Cultural District and the Board of County Commissioners for making the Special Projects Grant Program possible. Thanks to their support, we have $250,000 available for your organizations through this year's grant cycle. And we're also able to provide you with workshops like today's event to help you develop compelling grant proposals to get your projects funded. We are all looking for ways to get funding. It is my pleasure to introduce today's presenters, Mindy Muller and Timothy Wells. Mindy is a social entrepreneur, founder, and president and CEO of Community Development Professionals, LLC. Mindy has a passion for helping nonprofits get organized and get funded. And she's authored more than 50 curricula on topics pertaining to nonprofit organizational development and has trained thousands of professionals representing community organizations across the United States and Canada. Timothy is an exhibiting artist, educator, and art community builder. He is the founder of Timothy Wells Arts Consulting, LLC, the editor of Art Around Town Dayton, and serves as a board member for Troy Main Street, Piqua Arts Council, and Art Association of Randolph County in Indiana. He was also a grant review panelist for the Montgomery County Special Projects Grants in 2020 and 2021. So he's going to provide you with a great insight on what grant panelists will be looking for in your applications. Mindy and Tim, I will hand it over to you.
Fantastic. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for spending some time with us today. So I'm going to take the first part of this. I'm Mindy, and Tim is to my right, the bearded man, so you can see him. But we're going to kind of share the space today as we go through our different PowerPoint presentation today. I'm going to share my screen. Oh, can you enable me to share my screen, Bill? That would be great. And then we'll walk through. We are going to put out in the chat. I'm going to give everybody a couple minutes to make sure we have everybody. And then I'm going to put out in the chat a copy of the booklet that has all the slides in it. So you can have that to refer back to. There we go. So hopefully everybody can see that. And what we're talking about today is really how to craft an impactful narrative. And so we're going to spend our time kind of walking through this. The slides are way more content heavy than I'm going to verbally go over, especially at the beginning. I tend to be very content heavy in our presentations, but I want you to have the information, and then in the booklet you can go back and review and look at those as we go through, and you remember kind of some of the things that we talk about. So I'm going to start with just some general overview about grants. And then I'm gonna pass it on over to Tim, and he can talk specifically around his perspective of having reviewed these before, and what to give from a reviewer's perspective, some pointers for you to really consider as you craft your narrative. So I'm going to start with just some overall grant, what I call grant prep. And this is just in general. This certainly is true for this opportunity. But as you think about using this opportunity as a way to build your capacity as an organization, I want to talk about some grant principles in general. And so that's what this first part is going to really lean into. And then we'll get into the specifics of this opportunity before I hand it back over to Tim. So when we talk about grant prep, and this is kind of before you really start thinking about putting things on paper, there are some things you need to be just knowledgeable about as the writer, as the person that's pursuing. And I call it really knowing your stuff. You have to know your organization. When we are writing grants, we need to just not hand this off to anyone. We need to make sure that whoever is putting our passion on paper in form of a grant narrative really understands what we're doing here. They really need to know the organization. They need to have a good handle on what the organization is about, what it is that you do, how you make an impact, making sure that whoever's selling your organization on paper through a narrative really understands the organization and also really understands what you're applying for, what the program or project is that you're going to be applying for, so that they have a really good knowledge and handle on the entirety of the picture of both the organization and the program or project that you're going to be writing about. We also need to know our numbers in terms of the budgetary. Sometimes we put the budget over here, and I know there's a whole training that's being offered about numbers and putting the budget together. That's important, but the budget numbers have to match kind of the other pieces of this. The narrative and the budget go hand in hand. So we really need to make sure we understand, or whoever's writing and putting this together, if it's a person or a team, really understands the organization, the project, and how the numbers fit into that. We also need to make sure and always pay attention to the funder. I'm telling you, I'm super impressed with this that was put together. It's very thorough. It has a lot of great guidelines for you to follow. And reading this is going to be paramount to making sure you understand the mind of this opportunity. What are they trying to accomplish with this opportunity? We call it knowing the funder. When we are seeking funds as a nonprofit, sometimes we are so passionate about what we do, we forget that the people investing the dollars have their own set of passions. They are also passionate about what they do. And we're asking them to come alongside and invest in our work. We need to make sure we understand their perspective, their vantage point, what they're looking to support. So understanding the funder's preferences, what issues do they care about? And they lay out very specifically what they care about in this program guidelines. So we need to understand from any funder that we would pursue, this one and others, what issues do they care about? Where do they like to fund? I noticed one of the things in here is that you have to be located in Montgomery County. So if you're not, that's not going to be a good fit for this opportunity. We need to understand the preferences of our funder, issues they care about, the geography they like to support, and what kinds of expenses they want to support. Super important that we know that going in and asking for funds. We also need to make sure we understand the application procedures. We need to be very clear about how do we apply for these dollars. And almost always funders will be very upfront with you about that. And certainly in this opportunity, they are. So we need to know what the application procedures are, and we need to follow them. If they've spent the time to craft something in terms of program guidelines, this is going to be the document that we need to know, understand, read backward and forward to make sure we understand the procedures, what it's going to require for us to go after these dollars. The other thing that we need to make sure and do is if we are confused about something, to ask. Funders are, I heard at a training one time, funders are lonely people, meaning they want to build relationships with the people that they're supporting. And so don't be afraid to ask. The only time I would suggest not asking is if they specifically say no phone calls. Don't pick up the phone and ask us questions. That's not what we have with this opportunity. They are going above and beyond to make sure you have all the information you could possibly want to do a really great project proposal. And so make sure that if you have confusion about something, you're going to ask questions. And certainly we'll leave some time today for you to ask some questions of us as we go through and finish this time out today. Other things to think about is the deadlines. Adhere to deadlines. They are non-negotiables when we talk about grant funding. That's true across the board, and that's certainly going to be true for this opportunity. Adhere to the deadline. Be early, not late. Make sure we're not at the nth hour pressing that send button. We want to make sure we're doing this so that we can have everything in ahead of the deadlines. Deadlines are critical in funding and grant opportunities. And then amount to request. This is more of a general point because we know they're going to give $10,000 grants out for this particular opportunity. But in general, when we are going after grant funding, we want to know what is a reasonable amount to request from this funder. What amounts have they awarded in the past? Sometimes they'll share that in program guidelines, and sometimes we can ask that question of them or dig to see where they've funded in the past. But in general, when we talk about grants, we want to make sure we're requesting an amount that makes sense for that particular funder. And the great thing about this opportunity is they've made that very clear and very easy to find. So just some general grant prep kind of information that I wanted to share. Now we're going to kind of walk through crafting an impactful narrative, which is what we're really about today. And you'll see here some of the outline of the opportunity, and hopefully all of you have taken time to kind of explore what this particular grant, what the proposal guidelines are about, and seen some of the structure of the way the application is laid out. And that's what we have mirrored here. So they'll start with some applicant overview and about your organization and about the project. These are not things that we're going to focus on here, but you can see that in the actual application where those are, just plugging in numbers and asking for you to fill in some fields. The project narrative is really what we're going to focus on in our time today. And you can see where some of these start here with the project description. And we're going to walk through each of these sections briefly so you can kind of get an overview of what the proposal narrative is intended to cover. So it's all these different sections. One thing I want to just overall make sure that I say to you is that really the job of a proposal narrative, while we can get in the weeds and we will talk about some details with the different sections, overall, your job in doing any kind of funding proposal to convince the funder that you are the best investment of their dollar. They're looking to invest these dollars to help them reach their goals. And your job when you are submitting a proposal is to be very specific and be very persuasive about how you can help them meet their goal. If convince this funder that you are a great investment of this dollar because you're going to help them achieve their goals and you're going to do it with excellence. And so I want you to kind of keep that overall goal in mind for any grant funding that you would go after, but certainly is true in this opportunity that we're talking about today. The project description is the first kind of subtitle underneath the project narrative. And this is really the heart of your proposal. It tells what you're going to do and who benefits from what you are doing. You're going to talk in this section about how the grant funds will be used. You want to be specific and thorough. We should be able to look at your project description and have a very clear picture of what you're doing. This is the guts of your proposal. It's really what you're going to be doing with these funds. That's what you include in the project description. You also want to think about some things about like who else is in this with you? Are you doing partnership with others? Are there other organizations that are going to be involved? Most funders, and I think this is true of this opportunity as well, is really looking about collaboration. We like not having lone wolves in the community doing work, but we want to support those that are collaborating in partnership, that are looking at how they fit in the greater good of what you're doing with cultural arts in the community. So who else is coming alongside you? Are you doing part of your project in cooperation with others? We want to include that here in the project description if you are. And the other thing in general is, why is your organization the one to meet this need? That goes back to that principle of you want to be the best investment of these dollars. Why are you the organization that is the best suited to meet this need or do this particular project? Really, the project description is just painting the picture of what it is that you're going to be doing. So one of the rules of thumb that we have with proposals in general, but certainly is true with project description, is we want 2 or 3 people to read this. You should do that both inside your organization to think, does this make sense? Does this seem like it's really painting the picture we want it to paint? So having 2 or 3 people within the organization review it, but also having 2 or 3 people outside of your organization review it, because the reviewers, while they're probably coming from an arts background, they aren't part of your network or they aren't part of your organization. And so you want to make sure that you're clear enough by having other people outside of your organization reading your project description. And they'll be able to say, I don't really understand what that is, or I know exactly what you're doing. And that'll be a really good check for you as you prepare to submit your project description. So that's a really important kind of, like I said, the heart of your narrative is going to be describing the project. And then in project implementation, which is the next section, is really describing how the project is going to be implemented. So the description lays out what you're going to be doing, who you're going to be serving, and project implementation is the section where you're going to describe how you're going to do that. How are you planning on making this happen? And that's often where we will include identifying the timeline. So this is a 1-year project grant. So how are you going to do this over the year? What's that going to look like? So it's a little bit more the detail of how you're going to make that happen. So you said what we're going to do. This is going to be where we put how we're going to make that work, how that's going to happen. And then the next section then in the project narrative part of this proposal narrative is talking about your personnel. They put a lot of emphasis on making sure that you have the capacity to do what you say you're going to do. Having who is doing this really matters in this particular proposal. And so this is where you're going to outline who's doing what, who's the visionary. This is their language in the application. Who's the visionary? Who are the creative personnel that's going to come alongside? Who's the entire team that's going to be doing this work? They really care about that in this particular RFP. And so you want to make sure that you're outlining that clearly here in the personnel. This is where you get to brag about each other. I mean, Tim's resume is fantastic, right? This whole bio that he did at the beginning, you can tell he's very credible in his field. And that's what you want to do in this particular section, is make sure you're outlining the team and show that they have the capability and the capacity to really do this project well. You want to be thorough with this. Don't just put a one-liner. Brag on your people here. Make sure that we are telling that we absolutely have the right team and the team that can make this project happen. We're using this to demonstrate that we have the experience, we have the capacity to do it, and we're going to do it with excellence. So project personnel is one section that you really are going to start bragging on your team and identifying who they are. The next section in the application is project impact. And this is the idea of why does this project matter? It's not just because it's going to make us feel good to do it, or we really love this and so we're hoping to have a great experience. That's all well and good, but project impact means why does it matter? How is this going to make a difference in the community that we're serving? How will the community be different as a result? What will be changed? What will improve? Why does this project make a difference? So the more you can lean into that and lean into impact, the stronger the case that can be made that this is a great investment of our dollar, because they're really going to make a great impact in this community. So be very clear about what the impact is. And I know there's a whole section, a whole training that's going to talk about impact and evaluation. So if you struggle with how to put that on paper, I would really suggest that you attend that particular workshop, because that will help really give some identity to how you make this case for impact. But you're going to make some real ideas of goals and objectives that you're going to be able to achieve in order to demonstrate that you really are making a difference with this particular project. So goals and objectives there's a lot of different ways to do identify those and write those down. But the idea overall is that you want to put down what you hope to achieve or what you hope to attain, and then make sure there's a quantifiable and a time delineated way that you are going to know that you did that. So being very clear about, here's what I want to do. Here are the steps I'm going to take to know that I achieve that. So that's where usually we identify goals as the overarching principle or goal that we're going to do, and then objectives are quantifiable. So we will know whether or not we accomplish those because they're laid out in a way that we can know whether or not they were achieved. So we don't just say we're going to eradicate homelessness. We're going to say we're going to make sure that we are providing housing for a certain number of people for this amount of time. That kind of quantifiable objective is what we're looking for here. But again, there's a whole section, a whole training that's going to be taking place about evaluation and impact. So if you want more information on that, on how to do some of that, I would suggest maybe you look at that. In general, when we talk about goals and objectives, we're really looking establishing 2 or 3. You don't need 20. You just need some 2 or 3 goals for each of your projects or programs, and then outline of 2 or 3 objectives that will you use to measure whether or not you met that goal. And then you just weave those into a paragraph form. So program impact overall is really about demonstrating that you really are making a difference. And here's how we know that. So making sure that there's some data and some way that we're gathering data to support that fact that we really have made an impact. So project impact's one you really want to pay attention to because they're really looking at that in the way that they're going to be reviewing the proposals. So I gave a little bit of an example there, and you'll have that in your notes. I'll put those out there here in a little bit. There is an opportunity this go around to do capacity building, and I don't know how many of you are planning on doing project-based versus capacity building projects for your ask, but they do have some specific ideas for how capacity building relates back into this particular opportunity. And again, that's all laid out in your program guidelines. And so make sure that you're reading those. I've kind of included some of those here. How do we demonstrate impact? And when we talk about capacity building, it's really how it's impacting your organization's ability to do a good job of engaging and serving the community. So in project impact for capacity building, it looks and feels a little bit different because it's not about impacting the community with the project. It's about making your organization stronger so that you can then do a better job of engaging and impacting the community. So capacity building is really about building up your organization to be able to serve more effectively. So in this answering of this particular section, you want to pay attention to the little bit of difference in how you would talk about impact with capacity building. The next section then is project evaluation. And again, this kind of relates right back to the impact section when we talk about goals and objectives. So we're going to lay out here are our goals and objectives. Evaluation is going to say, this is how we're going to be able to demonstrate we've met those things. So we want to have a system in place that makes sure that we're evaluating the job that we're doing. We say we're going to do these things. How are we going to be able to demonstrate we did that? So it really is about laying out a plan for how we're going to evaluate this project to see, did we accomplish what we set out to do? And again, that workshop, I put the date up there for you. If you need some help with that, highly suggest you attend that. When we think about project evaluation, we think about quantitative with numbers. We also want qualitative. How well did we do? Did we strive with excellence in every way that we wanted to? Not just the blanket numbers of people that we served, but also how quality was the service that we provided or the project that we did. So we want to think about that and how we're going to do that. And that's what we're going to relate in this section here. We're going to talk to the reviewers about how we're going to evaluate. How are we going to know we did this? So that's in a section that you definitely want to pay attention to. And it ties again back to that impact portion. We don't want to do these separately. They really do tie together. The next section that is included in the proposal is accessibility and inclusion. That's a very important value to this particular funder. And so we want to make sure that we are talking about that. How are we celebrating diversity? Who is it that we're serving, making sure that we are talking about being inclusive, that we are thinking about the audience that we're going to be serving. And it's all of the ways that is listed here, the disabilities, the language, the culture, socioeconomic. We want to make sure we're able to open the arts up to a very diverse audience. And so how are you going to do that? This is the section where you can talk about that. They're really interested in bringing cultural arts to a new audience. So if you're serving a community that has been largely underserved with the arts, this is where you're going to champion that and you're going to talk about that. So you have to be very intentional about thinking, how are we making arts more accessible and more inclusive? How is this project going to help us further the goals of doing that for our organization? So don't just use blanket statements here. You want to give real intentional thought to this, because this again is a real value that this organization, the funder, has put on this particular opportunity. So you want to make sure you really are intentionally thinking about how you're going to be able to meet these things with your particular project. Again, celebrating diversity We want to make sure we do that, bring cultural arts to a new audience. I guess I said that. And then in capacity building, we're going to explain how this project expands the organization's ability to serve more diverse persons moving forward. So that the new part here is really about the capacity building section. So if you're doing that kind of project, you're going to talk about how this project will help you serve a more diverse audience moving forward. So if you're asking for things like a strategic plan or training of your board, those kinds of capacity projects, you're going to want to make sure and tie in how does that position your organization to serve a more diverse audience moving forward. So this is a really important one for you to think about, and that's how you would tie that in if you were going to do capacity building as your primary project. And the next section in the application then is project promotion and marketing. And I know this is one that's really tough oftentimes for nonprofits. How do we tell people about the amazing things that we're doing? You need to have a plan for that. So this project that you're going to be doing, how are you going to get people in the seats? How are you going to be able to serve this audience? What's your plan for promoting and marketing this particular project that you're doing? You want to think about being creative with that, but you want to be very specific about how you're going to do that. Your reviewers are going to be mostly artists that are in the field. And so they're going to know what's reasonable and what is a realistic way of promoting and marketing. So you want to give some actual thought to not just something that seems like good wordsmithing, but really what is a practical way for you to get more people to be able to serve the audience that you intend to serve with your project. So being very specific about that is important. Producing professional visuals may be a part of that, making sure that there's a social media campaign for marketing. And you can do all kinds of cool stuff with target markets on social media. So if that's the kind of approach you're going to take, you want to be specific about that and share that. If you're going to produce a marketing slick of some kind or some kind of takeaway for people, you want to make sure that that's put into your project design and maybe even your budget, if it's going to require you to do something that's printed or something of that nature. But make sure that you're spending enough time thinking through how are we going to market this, and not just some answer that's not going to really help get an audience there. So it's not, any of these sections aren't just really checking a box. It really is about being intentional and thinking through how we're going to reasonably do this for this particular project. And then the next section talks about use of funds. You want to make sure your narrative matches your budget. And again, there's a whole workshop on budgeting. If numbers are not your thing, make sure the person doing that portion, it is their thing, or that you're attending the workshop to learn more about that. Budgets are not separate from the narrative. They go together. We need to make sure the budget matches what we said we were going to do in our narrative, and things are reasonable. The costs are reasonable. They're well thought out. Really important when we talk about the use of funds section that you include that in there. And then there's a couple other sections toward the end of the application that need some attention. And they're putting some emphasis on this when they talk about how they're going to look and evaluate the proposal. So I want to make sure and mention it. Funding reduction section means if you don't get 100% of what you're asking for, can you still do the project? You need to be reasonable with your reply to that. There may be some projects that we absolutely can't do it if we don't get the full 10, or others that could be scaled back depending on how much money you get. So you need to think about what that looks like for your project and make sure you're responding in a narrative with what's reasonable if the funding is reduced and you wouldn't get the full amount you request. On the COVID-19 response, that's the last section here, and they're really saying, how are you going to follow protocol? Being sensitive to that. Right now, things are pretty open with us being able to do activities. There aren't a lot of restrictions, but we all know that can change on a dime. So you need to be thinking through if things change, if protocol changes, or if you enter a place that still requires some COVID-19 protocol, how is your project going to respond to that? So be thinking through that and make sure there's a good response with how this is going to potentially impact your project. So the last little section I want to talk about, those are all the sections in the application themselves that I wanted to review with you. The last thing I kind of want to walk through with you is about just in general about language within your narrative. There are the nuts and bolts of how you fill out information according to the way the application is laid out. But there's also an importance when we do grant writing to make sure that we are thinking through how we say things. And that's what we call persuasive language. Your job is to persuade this funder that you are the best investment of their dollar. And sometimes the words that we use can really tip that funder into our favor by using some language that's really persuasive and really convinces them that we are a great investment. And some things I just wanted to kind of throw out to you is I really like the term investment, not gift. Funders are not giving you money, they're investing in your work. And so even just using that concept and having that in your mind can help the funder recognize that you take this partnership seriously. They're investing in what you're doing and you're going to do a great job for them. So using some of those terminologies of investment and not just the gift of their dollar, because it's really not a gift. It has absolute strings attached. They're giving it to you in order to. And so I like the term investment for that. Using things like strong, the word meaningful, that we are a stable organization. I love the idea of saying we're stewards of the dollars. We're going to use their dollars as if they were my very own dollar. We're going to be a good steward. Using things like best practices, making sure that the things that we're doing with their dollars are going to be according to the best practices, the best way to do things, that you've thought that through. So using some language around that. Thinking through accountability and evaluation and lessons learned, those kinds of terms that just show them you're serious about what you're doing and you're going to be using their money wisely. Thinking about impact and using the term impact. This particular funder cares a lot about community impact. So using that phrase can be really powerful. Avoid things like I may or we may be. No, you will do things, making sure that we're definitive with the language that we use. We also want to show commitment that we're doing this. This is an important project. We're not just doing it because there's this request for proposal out, but we're doing this because this is important to our community. So showing a commitment to the project and a commitment to the community is important. Be confident in language. We don't want to be wishy-washy. We want to be really definitive. We want to show strength in our proposal, really important. And then again, thinking partnership, just in general in our mindset, thinking about we're collaborating. They're coming alongside and joining you in this amazing work that you're doing. And so thinking about that as you write will help that come through in some of the language narrative that you use. The last little piece of this is to really watch your jargon. So sometimes we have industry language that we use. We have certain acronyms that we use. You are probably going to be speaking to artists when you're talking to evaluators, but they may not know all the nuanced jargon that you may know. And so we want to watch that. We want to make sure we're careful about that. And sometimes if we have people outside of our organization reading our proposals, they'll catch those things. They'll say, I have no idea what that term means. And so we might be able to tweak that some. But just watch that as you look through and as you watch and read your particular narratives. And then again, that 2 to 3 eyes principle, both people inside and outside your organization reading through your proposal. And that will give you some great insight and feedback from people that know what you do and want to help see you be successful. So the next section here, I'm not going to go through all of these. I'm going to turn this over to Tim here in a second. But I did include in here the review criteria. Really read that thoroughly. It's in here. This is your program guidelines. Look, the ones that I included in here, and when I hand this over to Tim, I'll go ahead and put the notes out in the chat. But read through what they consider the excellent proposal. That's the mark you're going for here. And I laid all of them out for all of the different areas that they're going to be reviewing so that you can see exactly what they see as a really excellent proposal. They made it very simple for you to see all of this. And so make sure that you're reading that in here in the program guidelines so that you are aiming for that excellence with your responses. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to you, Tim, and I will put that booklet out in the chat and then be around if there are questions about any of that. So go ahead, Tim, take it away.
Can you keep on driving your screen? Is that fine?
Sure, I can.
Okay? Thank you. So I'm Timothy Wells. I was on the grant review panel on 2020 and 2021. I have founded and started my own 501c3. I've written winning grants. I'm exhibiting visual artist, and I'm also an artist community builder. My section that we're talking about on this is going to be my observations and lessons learned from being on the panel for the last 2 years. So the first thing is, this is the workflow that we go through. The panelists review every grant application. We score every application before the panel meets. Each panelist is assigned several applications to present and summarize to the rest of the panel. We discuss the grant. We review our scores. Combined scores are then presented to the panel, and then the panel discusses the awards based on the revised scores and our discussion. So that is the workflow that the panelists are going to be going through as they review your applications. Next slide. The amount of time the panelists spend reviewing the applications, making notes and scoring is significant. I probably spent upwards of 40 to 50 hours easily reviewing all the grants and making notes and going through the scoring system. And that was before the panel even met. The better organized your application is and the clearer the information is, it makes it easier for the panelists. If they're confused about your project, your scores may suffer. It just kind of makes sense. And I came up with some tips to help your application be clear. I don't typically put this much information on my slides, but I wanted to make it somewhat easy to read so you guys can look through this information on your own as you're working on your grant and go, what did he say? You don't have to worry about it because I wrote it down for you. This is going back to what Mindy was talking about. Think of your application as a news story. Who, what, where, when, why are all things you need to include in your application. And don't forget to put the passion in there. The more you can convey about your organization and your project and what you're doing and why, it comes through in reading. And if the panelists can see that, you have a better chance of connecting with them at a logical and an emotional perspective. So while it is important to include the who, what, where, when, and why, try to make sure you're covering, like I said, your passion in there. Next one. All right, and as Mindy already covered, familiarize yourself with the application in each section. Don't wait until the last minute. We all are going to do that. That's just how it goes. But wait at the last minute, things are going to fall through the cracks and you're going to miss some details. If you're having a hard time writing, record yourself talking to someone about your organization and your project. I know I am not scared by the blank piece of paper or the white screen, so I don't mind just sitting down and writing. But I know that some people freeze up or their brain just can't start thinking logically. If you're having a problem, record yourself talking about your project and then go back and listen to that and make notes as you go through. Read or write, review, edit, rewrite, review, and etc. And go through that process many times. Just like in school, if you turn in a first draft of a book report or a paper, the teacher's going to know. I'm a teacher. I know when my students have put together and sent in their first draft and they did it at an hour before class started. It's obvious. So if your first draft, it will probably be obvious. Even if you're a professional grant writer, your first draft is still going to have some holes and glitches in it. And as Mindy pointed out, and this is just advice for everything, have someone or someone's review your application. Next one, please. Oops. We go too fast. We went too fast. There's one. Go back one. Or is my internet being slow again? Okay. I printed out all of the applications that were submitted in 2020 and 2021. I'm a paper person. I want to be able to see it, make notes, highlight things, leaf back and forth. So some panelists may be printing out your application. Just be aware of that. Last year when I printed out, I had it printed out 2 pages per sheet, front and back, and all of them still took, it was about that thick, it was 4 to 5 inches thick of printouts that I was going through and reading and reviewing and making notes and comments. So there were some last year that were, once they're printed out using the application process, were around 30 pages, and some were upwards of 300 pages of print. The 300-page ones, I'll tell you, when I print them out, I was like, oh, that's a lot to read. But we do read them all, but it is kind of you do have to sit down and get your cup of coffee and go, okay, this is a novel. I need to spend some time on this one. So just be aware of that. That I don't know if all of the panelists do. I think most of them did last year, had them printed out. So just be aware of that. So as we're going through it, we're seeing it visually, not through page by page, on screen by screen, on a scrolling screen, but on a stack of paper. I don't know if that's important, but I put it in there just so you know. All right, well, that's next. Make it easy for the reviewers to find and summarize. Like I said, each reviewer is going to be presenting summarizing several of the applications to the panel. Make it easy for them to tell your story. Things like founded in 2011, we have over 11 years of serving our community. It may seem obvious, but if you say founded in 2011 and you don't include the 11 years of serving, I'm having to go, okay, so that means they've been around. If it's making me slow down when I'm talking about your organization, then maybe it's something you should include in there. Things like, and I came up, this is not a real project, I just came up with one, not to show any favoritism or biasness. Serving the Martian community, which represents 24% of the Montgomery County population, you can include information in a nice summary way and give them the script to read to the other panelists. So just in that sentence, we know that it's the Martian community in Montgomery County, and they represent 24% of the population. You can put together information in a nice, clear, concise way that is easy for them to read and understand and to talk about, and it helps you with your elevator pitches as you're talking to other organizations and donors. Summarize what your project is. Our organization is currently limited in its ability to provide fiddle lessons to the Martian community due to lack of access to students outside of downtown. There's your problem. That's the problem you're trying to fix in a nice summary. We are requesting $10,000 to rent class locations outside of the immediate downtown and pay instructors to travel to those communities with large Martian filler populations. So we've identified the problem in one sentence, and we've come up with, here's what our solution is, another sentence. It's nice, clear, concise. It's the introduction to your whole story. So if you can summarize your information in this way, it makes it easier for the panelists to understand who you are and what you're doing and why. Next one, please. Copy and paste may not be your best friend. There are separate sections of the application for a reason. If you're copying and pasting between sections, you may want to read the questions and make sure you're focusing on that section. Not in this grant, but in other panels I've been on, they just copy and paste the same thing over and over and over. And as a reviewer, you kind of go, you kind of start questioning if they actually read the application and know what they're trying to do. I know it's tempting to think you have this great paragraph explaining what your project is. If you keep copying and pasting it over and over, you're suggesting to the reviewers they're not reading your application. So if you find yourself doing copy and pasting, step back for a second and think about, why am I doing this? And is this the right site? Am I putting the right information in this section? Next slide, please. Am I lagging? Oh, there we go. Find the balance of not enough information and too much. Too little information or detail can cause the panel to ask questions and speculate what you're asking for or doing. This has happened in the past with this panel, where we start speculating, what are they doing? How are they going to do this? And we start trying to problem solve or guess what the application or the applicant was going to do and how they're going to do it. And as the grant applicants, you have very limited ability to clarify to the panel during that discussion. I don't know what the mechanism is for this year, but last year, if you had a comment to the panel, you had to send it to the moderator, who is CultureWorks, and if they thought it was relevant to clarify to the panel, they would present to the panel. But if the panel ends up speculating as to what you're doing and why, or how you're going to solve these problems, that probably will result in some lower scores, because you didn't give us enough information to know what you're trying to do and why. On the other hand, too much information can cause panelist review fatigue. Like I said, knowing that I was going to have to review a 300-page application, I would go, okay, that one's going to be by itself. That's going to be a separate time for me to sit down and spend time with it. And there were some where all those pages were needed. And some of those were like, that's good information, but it's kind of redundant. You've gave me a lot of the same type of work over and over and over. I get it. I know you have a long history. And the big one is try to anticipate questions the panelists may have and answer them in the application. This goes back to what Mindy said, and I'm going to say, and we're going to say it a bazillion more times: have other people read it. Have people within your organization read it to make sure you're presenting the organization correctly, and then have people outside look at it and go, I don't know, I don't understand what this means. I don't know this terminology, or yeah, but what about the Martian fiddlers who don't have access to fiddles? So how are you ignoring the fact that there are people who want to play fiddle and they're Martians, they don't have fiddles? So you need to think, okay, I need to address access to fiddles for the community. So like I said, trying to anticipate questions that they may have and then answer them in the application before the panelists have a chance to ask you. All right, next slide, please. Focus on your organization, project, and community served. It hasn't happened too much with this one, with these grants, but it happened on others where the applicant is talking all about their competitors. About, well, this is how we do it, and they do it this way. I'm not trying to give them money. I'm trying to give you money. So focus on your organization and your passion and your community served, and don't focus your time and energy about your project telling me how someone else is doing theirs. So just keep your focus on you. Next slide, please. CultureWorks does a great job of making sure that the panelists come from a varied background of skills and knowledge, and they all are going to come in with their own knowledge, skills, and interests. Some will have a strong finance background and skills, and they'll probably focus on the budget. Others will focus on the project plan. I came from a project plan background in corporate America, so I tend to look at the project plan, the project manager, and the project team. That was kind of one of the things that I was looking at. I looked at the whole thing and reviewed the whole thing, but that was the one that was my sweet spot and I paid a lot of attention to. All sections of the application are discussed by the review panel. In photography, I worked with a photographer who's a famous photojournalist, and he'd always ask the students, what's the most important part of the frame in a picture? And they would go through and say, the subject or whatever. And he's like, no, the entire frame is the important part. Every section of the application is a strong section. If you have a weakness in an area, enlist someone, either a staff member, volunteers, or friends of your organization to help. If you're not good with numbers and budget, have somebody who is good with numbers and budget come through and work on that section with you. It is a team effort. So it's important to know where your strengths are, but it's also important to know where your weaknesses are in the application and build up those weaknesses with somebody who's strong. And of course, worth repeating, try to anticipate the questions the panelists may have and answer them in the application before they get to the review section. Next slide, please. When I was reviewing them, the section on full, partial, zero funding awarded was very important. Don't overlook it or minimize it. What it does is it shows the panel you fully understand your project, its plan, and its impact. If they come back and say, well, you've asked for 10,000, but we only are going to give you 5 because we want to make sure everyone gets a chunk of the pie, it helps for us, the reviewers, to fully understand that what happens to your project if you're only half funded. That doesn't mean that we look at it and go, or they look at it and go, well, they're fine with only 50%, so we'll just give them 50%. It never came down to a discussion like that. What was important was that it helped us understand you understand your project and its scope. If you don't watch the TV show Shark Tank, consider watching a few episodes. On the show, if you're not familiar with it, entrepreneurs approach a panel of successful business people, which are called the Sharks, and ask them to provide funding and support for their company. The information the entrepreneurs provide and the questions the shark asks is similar to the dialogue happening in grant applications and reviews. And on Shark Tank, sometimes well-prepared entrepreneurs don't get funded. There are lots of times when somebody has a Harvard MBA or Stanford MBA and they have the great business plan, they can answer all the shark's questions, and they go, we're not interested, or we don't like your attitude, or there's all kinds of things that cause them to say yes or no. And sometimes a person comes in with a passion so strong, but they don't really understand their business. The sharks will go, you know what? I love your passion. I love you as a person. I'm going to come in and help you do the part that you're not good at. So if you have not watched that show, maybe pull up a few episodes of it. They're kind of jerks. That's kind of their shtick, I guess. But the discussions that they have about businesses, I find useful with my entrepreneurship and with working with other businesses. Like, sometimes the crazy ideas are the ones that take off. So you never know. But it's just interesting conversations back and forth on how to be prepared and the questions from the business side and the passion side. I see a few smiles, so I don't know if people watch Shark Tank or not. Next one, please. So to review, the panelists do read every application. They bring various sets of skills and knowledge. Each section of the application is important. Don't overlook if the project isn't fully funded section. I think it is towards the end of the application, and it's easy by the time you get there to kind of go, well, if this happens, it's easy to, as you're writing, to start wrapping up in your mind before you're actually done. That is the dessert of the application, is that section of it. Be aware of too much copy and paste. Anticipate questions that the panelists may have and answer them in the application. I don't know if I've covered that yet or not, but that's an important one. Have others review your application, people familiar with your organization and people unfamiliar. Don't wait until the last minute. And first drafts will probably result in low scores, just like when you're in school. So that's my experience from being on the review panel with CultureWorks and on other review panels. Are we ready for questions? I don't know if we're doing raising hands or how we can get people in with questions.
I'm going to put the attachment that I promised you out in the chat so you all can have that. Yeah, if people just want to unmute yourselves and ask questions, I think we can field those questions as they come in. Anybody?
We did an excellent job. Either that or we overwhelmed them.
Maybe a little both. Okay.
Now, I will say that you guys did do an excellent job. I have so many notes here. I'm
Good.
to make sure that I do all these things. So it's not, it's a tidbit overwhelming with all the different sections and trying to make sure we get everything. But I did want to just chime in and say, no, you guys did an excellent job. I have tons of notes and you answered a lot of questions before I even had a chance to get to them, which is exactly what I'm going to do in my application. No.
I guess if you are feeling overwhelmed by the application, just do one section at a time. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like the analogy of how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So don't look at it and go, how am I gonna do all this? Just go, okay, I could do a section a day. I think you have time for a section a day.
Is everyone able to download out in the chat? Okay. And I'm going to send that to Bill as well, so they can send that out. And I think there may be a recording of this that'll be available. So if you missed some things, you get to hear us all again. Won't that be fantastic? So. Anybody else have some questions that we can answer for you? No question's a dumb question.
So I see that Darlene can't download it on her phone. Bill, do you know if the deck will be available for them to download or send out an email?
You can make sure it's available to everyone. And fortunately, I actually know Darlene, so I'll make sure, Darlene, that you get the deck as well.
This might seem like a silly question just because I haven't logged into yet and seen the entire application section. But will there be an option where we can kind of print it out and work on it that way before we submit it online? Or is there like a PDF or something that we can download and print out to work on it that way?
That's a great question. I think there must be a way because we have a paper copy of it that was sent over. So I think that there must be a way to do that, but I'm not familiar with that online system. Bill, do you know the answer to that question?
Fortunately, I do not. I can tell you though, in my just in my own work doing grant applications, there's a lot of us who you just copy and paste everything into a Word document so you can work on it separately because you don't want to count on the internet, being 100% reliable. So
if you're using a browser, you might be able to do print and then save it as a PDF.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll take whatever's on the website and save it as a PDF on your computer. That might work as well.
Okay.
Laura said in the chat she was able to download a PDF. So
okay.
Hopefully that will make that easier. So great question. Anybody else have anything that would be helpful for us to answer?
So Mindy, you talked about several of the training sessions that are coming up. Bill, do you have a schedule of all the things that are coming up with training and workshops available for the applicants?
Actually, I did have a nice little reminder here, and I know, Mindy, you did mention it in your presentation, but just that we do have 2 more grant writing workshops coming up next week. Number 1 was on measuring and evaluating project success. That is on Monday, April 11th at 4 p.m. That will be another Zoom meeting. And then on Friday, April 15th at 1 p.m., another Zoom meeting. That one will be on completing the project budget. So I do encourage everyone to take advantage of these opportunities. I think we've all been there with some other organizations where you fill out a grant proposal and you either get the money or nothing else. So it's very exciting even for us to be able to provide this opportunity for people to ask questions and really feel confident about the proposal you're submitting before you ever hit the submit button.
And I believe they're also offering mentorships, because I believe I'm signed up and Mindy signed up to mentor one-on-ones with people who are looking to apply as well.
Exactly. It's one of those that your organization can qualify for up to 2 hours of free grant consultation as you complete your special grant applications. So you may get to hear from Tim and Mindy again and again.
It's a good time.
Awesome. All right. And if you guys have any other questions, we do have these workshops. If you go to cultureworks.org, they're on our apply for funding page. You can always reach out to Karen Maynor as well. She is our director of grant making. I am typing her email address in the chat box if you don't already have it. But everyone here at Team Culture Works, we're more than happy to help you all out as you work with this process. All righty. And we are at 5:01, so that's all I think we have for our agenda. So thank you all for spending time with us today. Always exciting to see the applications and proposals that come in. We know there's a lot of creative people in the Dayton region, so this is one of the fun things about the job.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Mindy.
Thank you. Everyone have a great day.